He thought the language barrier was his shield. He thought his billion-dollar suit was his armor. Conrad Hughes, the CEO of Oakhaven Global, looked at the waitress serving his table and saw nothing but a servant, an invisible prop in his world of power and deceit. He switched to German, mocking her poverty, her appearance, and eventually, spilling the dark secrets of his empire, convinced she couldn't understand a syllable. He was wrong. Dead wrong. He didn't know who she really was, or that his arrogance was about to cost him everything. This is the story of how a spilled glass of water turned into a flood that drowned a titan. The Obsidian Room was not merely a restaurant, it was a theater of wealth. Located on the 45th floor of the Sterling Tower in downtown Chicago, it offered a view of the city that made ordinary people look like ants, which was exactly how the clientele liked it. The walls were lined with dark mahogany, the chandeliers dripped with Austrian crystal, and the silence was heavy, broken only by the clinking of silver against bone china and the hushed whispers of deals that moved millions. Sarah Bennett adjusted the collar of her stiff black waistcoat, suppressing a wince. Her feet were throbbing. She had been on a double shift since 6 in the morning, and it was now approaching 9 at night. At 24, Sarah had the kind of face that disappeared in a crowd, pale, tired, with mousy brown hair pulled back into a severe regulation bun. To the patrons of the Obsidian Room, she was not a person. She was a pair of floating hands that delivered Pinot Noir and cleared away half-eaten distinct plates of Wagyu beef. Table 4 needs a refresh on the sparkling water, Sarah. Move it, hissed Greg, the floor manager. Greg was a man who sweated profusely and treated the waitstaff like livestock. And straighten your apron. You look like you slept in a dumpster. Yes, Greg, Sarah said, her voice a monotone hum. She didn't have the energy to argue. She needed this job. The tuition for her final semester was due in 3 weeks, and her grandmother's medical bills were piling up on the kitchen counter like snowdrifts. She moved through the dining room with practiced grace, making herself small, weaving between the tables of senators, tech moguls, and trust fund heirs. She was invisible. It was her superpower. She heard affairs being confessed, insider trading tips being whispered, and marriages crumbling over dessert. She heard it all, and she said nothing. Until tonight. The elevator doors at the entrance chimed, a sound that usually signaled a VIP arrival. The air in the restaurant seemed to shift, growing colder. Greg immediately stiffened, smoothing his tie and rushing toward the hostess stand. Walking in was a man who didn't just enter a room, he annexed it. Conrad Hughes. At 52, Hughes was the CEO of Oakhaven Global, a logistics and shipping conglomerate that practically owned the Atlantic Ocean. He was tall, with silver fox hair styled to perfection, and a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite. He wore a navy bespoke suit that cost more than Sarah made in a year. Flanking him were 2 other men. One was his usual sycophant, a nervous younger executive named Peter Cross. The other was a stranger, an older man with thick spectacles and a severe expression. Sarah felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. Hughes was a regular, and he was a nightmare. He didn't just demand service, he demanded submission. "Sarah!" Greg snapped, reappearing at her elbow. "Table 1, the corner booth. It's Hughes. Do not, I repeat, do not mess this up. He's with Dietrich Vogel." Sarah's eyes flickered to the older man. Dietrich Vogel. The name rang a bell, but she couldn't place it immediately. She nodded, grabbing a fresh pitcher of ice water. "I've got it, Greg." He specifically asked for a server who is seen and not heard, Greg warned. "Keep your mouth shut, pour the wine, and disappear." Sarah approached table 1. Hughes was already seated, spreading his napkin across his lap with an aggressive snap. He didn't look up as she arrived. "Sparkling or still?" Sarah asked, her voice soft. Hughes waved a dismissive hand without making eye contact. "Still. And bring the 82 Bordeaux, the one I keep in your cellar. And make sure it's breathed properly, unlike last time." "Of course, Mr. Hughes." As Sarah turned to leave, she heard Hughes let out a sharp, cruel laugh. He leaned toward the older man, Vogel, and spoke. But he didn't speak in English. He switched seamlessly into German, the vowels hard and guttural. "Schau dir das an, Dietrich," Hughes said, his voice dripping with amusement. "Look at this, Dietrich. Das Restaurant verlangt $300 für ein Steak, aber das Personal sieht aus, als käme es direkt aus der Gosse. The restaurant charges $300 for a steak, but the staff looks like they came straight out of the gutter." Dietrich Vogel chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Amerikanische Standards, Konrad. Sie haben keinen Sinn für Klasse. American standards, Konrad. They have no sense of class." Sarah froze for a fraction of a second. Her back was to them, her hand gripping the water pitcher. The words hit her like a physical slap, but she didn't turn around. She didn't gasp. She kept walking, her face a mask of stone. Hughes thought he was safe. He thought he was speaking a secret code. He had no idea that Sarah Bennett wasn't just a waitress from Chicago. He didn't know about the 5 years she spent in Munich as a child, or the fact that her mother, before she died, had been a translator for the UN. He didn't know that Sarah dreamed in German just as often as she did in English. She walked to the bar, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Order up," she told the bartender, keeping her voice steady. "Bottle of the 82 Bordeaux for table 1. She stared at the reflection in the polished brass rail of the bar. She saw a tired waitress. Hughes saw a peasant. Tonight, she thought, tightening her grip on the serving tray. Tonight, the peasant was going to listen. When Sarah returned to the table with the wine, the atmosphere had shifted from casual arrogance to intense business negotiation. The third man, Peter Cross, looked like he was about to vomit. He was sweating, clutching a folder of documents as if it were a life raft. Sarah uncorked the wine with expert precision. She poured a splash for Hughes to taste. Hughes didn't even pause his conversation. He took the glass, swirled it violently, and downed the mouthful without savoring it. He gave a curt nod. Sarah began to pour for the table. As she moved around them, Hughes switched back to German, confident in his privacy bubble. "Der Junge hier," Hughes said, gesturing with his thumb toward Peter, who smiled nervously, clearly not understanding the insult. Hat keine Ahnung, was wir wirklich tun. Denkt, es ist eine Fusion. Ist so nützlich wie ein Loch im Kopf, aber unterschreibt die Papiere. The boy here, he has no idea what we are really doing. He thinks it is a merger. He is as useful as a hole in the head. But he signs the papers. Sarah poured wine into Peter's glass. Peter looked up at her and smiled gratefully. "Thank you," he whispered. "You're welcome," Sarah murmured. "Sieh sie dir an," Hughes continued in German, his eyes boring into Sarah's side profile. "Dieses billige Parfüm. Es riecht nach Verzweiflung. Ich wette, sie würde für $50 alles tun, was man ihr sagt." "Look at her. That cheap perfume. It smells like desperation. I bet she would do anything you told her to for $50. Dietrich laughed again, taking a sip of the expensive wine. "Konzentrier dich, Konrad. Die Prüfungskommission kommt nächste Woche. Wenn sie die Konten in den Caymans finden, ist das Spiel vorbei. Focus, Konrad. The audit committee comes next week. If they find the accounts in the Caymans, the game is over." Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she pulled the bottle away from Dietrich's glass. A single drop of red wine threatened to fall onto the white tablecloth, but she caught it with her napkin just in time. The Caymans. She knew Oakhaven Global. Everyone did. They were currently under investigation by the SEC for alleged price fixing, but the charges weren't sticking. The news had been playing in the break room for weeks. Hughes was painting himself as the savior of American industry, the victim of a witch hunt. But here he was, admitting to offshore accounts. Hughes leaned in closer to Dietrich, his voice dropping an octave, becoming serious. The cruelty regarding Sarah was forgotten. Now, it was about survival. Niemand wird die Konten finden, Hughes asserted. Ich habe die Frachtbriefe geändert. Projekt Echo. Wir haben den Giftmüll nicht entsorgt, Dietrich. Wir haben ihn verschifft. Nach Südostasien. Unter dem Deckmantel von medizinischen Hilfsgütern. No one will find the accounts. I changed the bills of lading. Project Echo. We didn't dispose of the toxic waste, Dietrich. We shipped it to Southeast Asia, under the guise of medical supplies. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. The bottle of wine in her hand felt suddenly heavy, like a weapon. Toxic waste disguised as medical supplies. It was monstrous. It wasn't just white-collar crime. It was evil. She stepped back, trying to retreat into the shadows. But Hughes suddenly snapped his fingers. "Hey," he barked in English. Sarah stopped. "Yes, Mr. Hughes?" "This wine," he said, pointing a finger at her. "It's warm. I specifically asked for it to be cellar temperature. It tastes like soup." It was a lie. The bottle was perfect. He was just doing it because he could. He wanted to exert dominance. "I apologize, sir," Sarah said, her voice remaining calm despite the storm raging inside her. "I can bring an ice bucket to chill it down slightly if you prefer." "I prefer competent service," Hughes shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The sound echoed through the silent restaurant. Heads turned. "Is that too much to ask? I'm spending $5,000 on this dinner, and I get served by a dim-witted girl who probably can't even spell Bordeaux." Peter Cross looked down at his lap, humiliated for her. Dietrich Vogel merely watched with cold amusement. Hughes looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with contempt. He switched back to German for the kill shot, looking directly at Dietrich while pointing at Sarah. "Sie ist wertlos. Ein Nichts. Wahrscheinlich hat sie nicht einmal die Highschool beendet. Ich sollte sie feuern lassen, nur um zu sehen, wie sie weint. She is worthless. A nothing. Probably didn't even finish high school. I should have her fired just to see her cry." Something inside Sarah snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet click of a safety being disabled. She looked at Conrad Hughes. She looked at his manicured nails, his arrogant sneer, and the glint of the gold watch on his wrist. She thought about the toxic waste. She thought about the people in Southeast Asia opening boxes, expecting medicine and finding poison. She thought about her mother, who taught her that language was a bridge, not a wall. She carefully placed the wine bottle on the table. She didn't put it in the coaster. She set it right on the white tablecloth, a deliberate breach of protocol. Greg, the manager, was rushing over, his face pale with panic. He could see the anger in Hughes's posture. "Mr. Hughes, I am so sorry," Greg began, breathless. "Is there a problem? I can have her removed immediately." Hughes smirked. "Yes, remove her. She's incompetent. And get me a real waiter." Sarah took a deep breath. She looked Greg in the eye, then turned her gaze to Hughes. She stood up straighter than she had all night. The fatigue in her legs vanished, replaced by a cold, hard adrenaline. She opened her mouth, and she didn't speak English. "Es tut mir leid, dass der Wein nicht Ihren Ansprüchen genügt, Herr Hughes," Sarah said. Her German was flawless. High German, Munich dialect, crisp, elegant, and sharper than a razor blade. I am sorry the wine does not meet your standards, Mr. Hughes. The silence that followed was absolute. Conrad Hughes's mouth fell open. His fork clattered onto his plate. Dietrich Vogel stiffened, his eyes widening behind his thick glasses. Sarah wasn't finished. She locked eyes with Hughes, her voice rising just enough to carry to the nearby tables. Aber vielleicht schmeckt wie Suppe, weil Sie zu sehr damit beschäftigt sind, darüber zu reden, wie Sie Giftmüll als medizinische Hilfsgüter tarnen. But perhaps it tastes like soup because you are too busy talking about how you disguise toxic waste as medical supplies. The entire section of the restaurant seemed to stop breathing. The silence in the obsidian room was heavy, suffocating. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a gunshot. Conrad Hughes sat frozen, his hand halfway to his water glass. The arrogance that had defined his posture only seconds ago had evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. It wasn't just that she spoke German. It was that she had stripped him naked in front of the entire room. She had repeated his darkest secret, Project Echo, with the clarity of a court stenographer. Greg, the manager, was the first to break the paralysis. He didn't understand the German, but he understood the tone. He understood that a waitress was speaking out of turn to the restaurant's most important client. "Sarah!" Greg shrieked, his voice cracking. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. "What do you think you are doing? Get away from this table immediately! You're fired! Get out!" Sarah didn't flinch. She yanked her arm out of Greg's grip with a force that surprised him. She didn't look at the manager. Her eyes were locked on Hughes, who was slowly turning a shade of crimson that clashed with the expensive Bordeaux. "I'm leaving, Greg," Sarah said, her voice steady, though her knees were trembling beneath her apron. "But not because I'm fired. Because I refuse to serve a man who poisons children for profit." "You little," Hughes began, starting to rise from his chair. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. Dietrich Vogel, the older man, reached out a calm hand and placed it on Hughes's forearm. "Setz dich, Conrad," he hissed. "Sit down, Conrad." Dietrich was smarter. He saw the cell phones coming out at the surrounding tables. He saw the eyes of the senator, 2 tables away, watching them. A scene was bad. A scene involving accusations of toxic waste was a PR nuclear bomb. Hughes sat, but his eyes were murderous. He composed himself, forcing a terrifyingly fake smile onto his face. He switched to English, addressing the room at large, his voice booming with false conviviality. "My apologies, everyone," Hughes announced, spreading his hands. "It seems we have a disgruntled employee here. A little mental instability, perhaps? Very sad. We were just discussing a video game plot. Yes, a hypothetical scenario." He turned his shark-like gaze back to Sarah. "Young lady," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I don't know what you think you heard, but eavesdropping on private conversations and twisting them is slander. I could sue you for everything you own." Sarah laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Everything I own? You mocked my shoes, Mr. Hughes. You mocked my grandmother's medical bills. Go ahead. Sue me for my bus pass. But you can't sue the truth." She leaned in, lowering her voice so only the table could hear. She switched back to German, ensuring that Peter Cross, the nervous executive, heard every word. "Und Sie, Peter? Schlafen Sie nachts gut?" she asked softly. "And you, Peter? Do you sleep well at night?" Hat gesagt, Sie sind so nützlich wie ein Loch im Kopf. Benutzt sie als Sündenbock. Wenn das Schiff sinkt, werden Sie derjenige sein, der ertrinkt. Nicht er. He said, "You are as useful as a hole in the head. He is using you as a scapegoat. When the ship sinks, you will be the one who drowns, not him." Peter Cross went white. The folder in his hands shook violently. He looked from Sarah to Hughes, realization dawning in his watery eyes. "That's enough!" Greg shouted. He signaled to the security guard standing by the elevators. "Jerry, escort her out! Now!" The large security guard lumbered forward. Sarah stepped back, raising her hands. "Don't touch me," she warned. "I'm walking out." She untied her apron right there in the middle of the dining room. She let it drop to the floor, landing on Hughes's polished Italian leather shoes. It was a flag of rebellion. "Enjoy your dinner, gentlemen," she said. "I hope it was worth the price." She turned and walked toward the exit. She walked with a dignity that she hadn't possessed 10 minutes ago. She could feel Hughes's eyes burning holes in her back. She could feel the whispers of the crowd. As she reached the elevator, she risked one glance back. Hughes was whispering furiously into his phone. Dietrich was staring at her, memorizing her face. But it was Peter Cross who caught her attention. He wasn't looking at his boss. He was looking at her, and in his eyes there was sheer terror and a silent plea for help. The elevator doors closed, sealing her in the quiet steel box. The moment the doors shut, Sarah's composure shattered. She slumped against the wall, gasping for air. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. What have I done? She had just declared war on a billionaire. She was a waitress with $300 in her bank account and a grandmother on oxygen. She didn't have a plan. She just had anger. But as the elevator descended 45 floors, Sarah realized something else. Hughes hadn't denied the accusations to her face. He had threatened her, which meant it was all true. And if it was true, and if Hughes was making calls right now, she wasn't just unemployed. She was in danger. The Chicago wind hit Sarah like a physical blow as she burst out of the Sterling Tower service entrance. It was bitter cold, the kind that freezes tears on your eyelashes. She didn't have her coat. It was still in the employee locker room, but she wasn't going back for it. She couldn't risk being cornered in the basement by Greg or, worse, Hughes's private security. She hugged her arms around her thin white button-down shirt and started walking fast, heading north toward the L train station. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. She pulled it out. It wasn't a call. It was a notification from her bank app, a deposit alert. $50,000 has been deposited into your account via wire transfer. Sender, OG Holdings. Sarah stopped dead in the middle of the sidewalk. People bumped into her, grumbling, but she didn't feel them. She stared at the screen. $50,000. Hughes worked fast. It was hush money, a bribe. It was smart, too. If she took the money, or even if she just kept it, he could claim she extorted him. Or he could claim she was paid off, and her credibility would be zero. She's just a blackmailer, they would say. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She stared at it for 3 rings, then answered, putting it to her ear without speaking. "Miss Bennett," came the smooth, rasping voice of Dietrich Vogel. "Cold night for a walk, isn't it?" "I don't want your money," Sarah said, her voice shaking in the wind. "Consider it a severance package," Dietrich said calmly, and a gesture of goodwill. "We are reasonable men, Sarah. We understand that tempers flared. You were tired. Mr. Hughes was stressed. But let's not make this into something it isn't." "He confessed to shipping toxic waste," Sarah said. "He called it Project Echo." "He was joking," Dietrich said, his voice hardening instantly. "And if you repeat that joke to anyone else, things will get very complicated for you. We know where you live, Sarah. We know about the nursing home your grandmother is in. Sunnyvale, isn't it? Room 302? It would be a shame if her funding was reviewed. The threat was subtle, but it hit Sarah in the gut. They had done a background check on her in less than 10 minutes. Go to hell, Sarah whispered, and hung up. She immediately blocked the number. She needed to get off the street. She ducked into a 24-hour pharmacy, the fluorescent lights stinging her eyes. She walked down the aisles aimlessly, trying to think. She couldn't go home. If they knew about Sunnyvale, they knew her address. She needed leverage. She had her word, but against a billionaire, her word was nothing. She needed proof. Suddenly, the glass doors of the pharmacy slid open. Sarah ducked behind a display of vitamins. She peeked through the gap between the bottles. It wasn't a security guard. It was Peter Cross. The young executive looked like he had run all the way from the tower. His suit was disheveled, his tie loose. He was clutching the leather folder to his chest, looking around wildly. He looked terrified. Sarah debated staying hidden. Peter was one of them. He was the one who signed the papers. But she remembered what she had said to him. "You are the scapegoat." She had planted a seed of fear, and it looked like it had blossomed. She stepped out from the aisle. "Peter!" Peter jumped, nearly dropping the folder. When he saw her, his shoulders sagged with relief. He rushed toward her, ignoring the confused look of the pharmacist at the counter. "Sarah," he gasped, out of breath. I followed you. I took the service stairs. I couldn't wait for the elevator." "Why?" Sarah asked, stepping back, keeping her distance. "Did Hughes send you?" "No." Peter looked offended, then frightened. "God, no. He's destroying everything. He's calling his shredding team right now. They're wiping the servers at the office tonight." "Why are you here, Peter?" Peter held up the folder. His hands were shaking so hard the papers inside rustled. "Because you were right," he whispered. "I speak a little German. Not much. High school level. I didn't understand everything they said tonight. But I understood Sundenbock, scapegoat, and I understood Caymans." He looked over his shoulder at the street, paranoid. "I've been signing things for months," Peter confessed, his voice trembling. "Shipping manifests, invoices for medical disposal. I thought we were helping people. I thought it was charity work. But the weights never added up. The containers were too heavy for bandages and pills." "It's waste," Sarah said grimly. "Industrial runoff. Heavy metals." "I know that now," Peter said. He shoved the folder toward her. "This is it. This is the file Hughes had at dinner. It has the real destination codes. It links Oakhaven to the shell companies in Southeast Asia. If the SEC sees this, Hughes goes to prison for life." Sarah looked at the folder. It was thick, bound in expensive leather. It was a smoking gun. "Why give it to me?" Sarah asked. "Why not go to the police yourself?" "Because I'm a coward," Peter cried softly. "And because my name is on the signatures. If I turn it in, I go down with him. But if you find it, if you stole it, maybe I can claim ignorance. Maybe I can turn witness." He shoved the folder into her hands. "Take it. Please, just take him down. He treated you like garbage. He treats everyone like garbage." Sarah gripped the folder. It felt heavy. It felt like power. "They deposited $50,000 in my account," Sarah said. "That's just the start," Peter warned. "Hughes has a fixer, a man named a man named Victor Thorne, ex-military. He's on his way. I heard Hughes call him. You need to disappear, Sarah." "Tonight?" Victor Thorne. The name sent a chill down her spine. "Where will you go?" Sarah asked. "I'm going to the airport," Peter said. I have a sister in Toronto. I'm going to hide until I see this on the news." He looked at her one last time, a mix of pity and admiration in his eyes. "You speak excellent German, by the way. Where did you learn it?" "My mother," Sarah said softly. "She taught me to listen." "Well," Peter said, buttoning his coat, "I hope the world listens to you." He turned and ran out of the pharmacy, disappearing into the night. Sarah stood there, holding the folder that could topple an empire. She looked at the security camera in the corner of the store. She knew she was being watched, not just by the camera, but by the city itself. She needed help. She couldn't go to the police. Hughes owned half the precinct captains in Chicago. She couldn't go to the media yet. They would want verification, and Hughes would spin it before she could get a word out. She needed someone who understood forensic accounting, someone who knew how to bury a billionaire. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone again. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 3 years. The phone rang 4 times. "Hello?" A groggy male voice answered. "It's 2 a.m. "David," Sarah said. "It's Sarah Bennett." There was a pause. "Sarah, you dropped out of law school 3 years ago. Why are you calling me?" "I didn't drop out because I was stupid, David. I dropped out because I was broke," she said, her voice sharpening. "But I still remember how to build a RICO case, and I have the evidence of the century." "What kind of evidence?" David asked, sounding more awake now. "The kind that gets us killed if we stay in Chicago," Sarah said. "I have Conrad Hughes's private ledger, and his hitman is looking for me." "Hughes, the shipping magnate?" David let out a low whistle. "Okay, where are you?" "Walgreens on State. I need a ride." "And David?" "Yeah, bring your laptop. We're going to war." David arrived in a battered 2015 Honda Civic that smelled faintly of stale coffee and old textbooks. He pulled up to the curb, the passenger door already unlocking with a clunk. Sarah dove in, keeping her head low. "Go," she said, her eyes glued to the rearview mirror. "Just drive. Anywhere but here." David, a lanky young man with messy hair and thick-rimmed glasses that were constantly sliding down his nose, merged into traffic. He glanced at Sarah, then at the thick leather folder clutched to her chest like a shield. "Okay," David said, his voice serious. "You look like you've seen a ghost, or committed a felony. Which one is it?" "Neither," Sarah said, her voice tight. "I'm trying to prevent a felony, or a dozen of them." She opened the folder, the streetlights flickering over the pages. "This is the ledger for Oakhaven Global. It proves Conrad Hughes is bypassing environmental protocols. He's dumping Class A toxic runoff into rivers in Vietnam and Cambodia." David nearly swerved into the next lane. "Hughes, you're talking about the green logistics guy? The guy on the cover of Forbes last month?" "The very same," Sarah said. "And he knows I have this. His fixer is looking for me." "Fixer?" David laughed nervously. "Like in the movies? Sarah, this is Chicago. People send lawyers, not hitmen." Peter Cross, the executive who gave me this, was terrified, David. He ran to Canada. He mentioned a man named Victor Thorne. David's smile vanished. "Thorne? I've heard that name. My professor mentioned him in criminal law. Ex-Blackwater. He runs a private security firm that specializes in corporate risk mitigation. If he's involved, we aren't dealing with a lawsuit. We're dealing with a clean-up crew." They drove in silence for 20 minutes, winding through the city until they reached David's apartment in Wicker Park. It was a converted warehouse loft, drafty, filled with stacks of law books, and importantly, off the main grid. Once inside, Sarah threw the folder onto David's cluttered desk. "We need to digitize this. If they catch me, they take the physical copy. We need backups. David was already booting up his rig, a custom-built PC with 3 monitors. Way ahead of you. I'm going to scan these and upload them to an encrypted cloud server. Then we're going to run the names against public databases. For the next 2 hours, the only sound was the whir of the scanner and the clicking of keys. As the pages appeared on the screen, the picture became horrifyingly clear. It wasn't just negligence, it was a calculated genocide of ecosystems. There were emails approving the use of corroded containers to save 12% on shipping costs. There were photos of leakage. There were bribes paid to port authorities. Look at this, David pointed at a spreadsheet. This column here, entertainment expenses. These are payouts. 50,000 here, 10,000 there. He cross-referenced a name. Sarah, look who received a consulting fee last month. Sarah leaned in. Robert Calzone. Who is that? Captain Robert Calzone, David said, his face pale. Chicago PD, 1st District, the district where the Obsidian Room is located. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. So we can't go to the police? No, David said. If we walk into a precinct with this, the evidence goes into a locker and never comes out. And we probably get charged with corporate espionage. Suddenly, a loud thump came from the hallway outside the apartment door. Both of them froze. David lived on the top floor. There were no neighbors above him. Then came a sound that was unmistakable, the metallic scratch of a lockpick working the tumbler of the front door. The fire escape, David whispered, his eyes wide. Now. Sarah grabbed the folder. David grabbed a portable hard drive. They scrambled toward the window that led to the alleyway iron stairs. As David slid the window up, the front door of the apartment didn't open. It exploded inward. A heavy boot kicked it off the hinges. Victor Thorne stepped into the apartment. He was a man of average height, wearing a nondescript grey jacket, but he moved with the terrifying fluidity of a predator. He held a silenced pistol in his right hand, casually, as if it were a cell phone. Miss Bennet, Thorne said, his voice calm, carrying across the room. Please, let's not make this a track event. I have bad knees. Sarah didn't look back. She scrambled out the window onto the metal grate of the fire escape. The cold wind whipped her hair into her face. David followed, sliding the window down, though it would offer zero protection. Go up, David hissed. The roof implies we're trapped. We have to jump to the next building. Are you insane? Sarah cried, looking at the 4-foot gap between the buildings. It was a 3-story drop to the concrete alley below. Jump or die, Sarah. Inside the apartment, Thorne walked to the window. He didn't rush. He raised the pistol. Foot. The glass shattered inches from Sarah's hand. Adrenaline surged through her veins. She didn't think. She leaped. She cleared the gap, landing hard on the gravel roof of the adjacent building. She rolled, scraping her palms, and scrambled up. David landed beside her a second later, gasping for breath. Run! They sprinted across the rooftop as another shot chipped the brickwork behind them. Thorne was climbing out onto the fire escape. He was relentless. They reached the access door of the second building. It was locked. Move! David shouted. He kicked the handle. It didn't budge. He kicked again. Nothing. Sarah looked back. Thorne was on the roof now. He was walking toward them, gun raised. Give me the folder, Sarah, Thorne called out. And you walk away. I promise. That liar! Sarah screamed. She looked around. There was a heavy ceramic flower pot near the door, used as a doorstop for better days. She grabbed it with both hands and smashed it against the door handle. The rusted lock mechanism crunched. She threw her shoulder against the door. It flew open. They tumbled into the stairwell of the second building, just as a bullet buried itself in the doorframe. They slammed the door shut and engaged the deadbolt from the inside. It won't hold him for long. David panted, dragging Sarah down the stairs. "We need to get to the street. I have my car parked around the block." "He knows your car," Sarah cried. "He found your apartment." "Not the Civic," David said, pulling his keys out. "My other car, my mum's minivan. It's parked 3 streets over." They burst out of the building's lobby and ran into the night, blending into a group of late-night bar-goers. They didn't stop running until they were 3 blocks away, lungs burning, hands shaking. As they piled into the beat-up minivan, Sarah looked at David. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead. "We can't hide," Sarah whispered. "He found us in 2 hours. He'll find us again." David started the engine. "Then we stop hiding. We stop running." "What do we do?" David looked at the hard drive in his hand. A fierce determination replaced the fear in his eyes. "We go on the offensive. Tomorrow morning, Hughes is hosting the Global Ethics Summit at the Convention Center. It's being live-streamed to millions." Sarah looked at the folder, then at David. A plan began to form in her mind. A plan that was reckless, dangerous, and their only hope. "Can you hack the feed?" Sarah asked. David cracked a grin. "Sarah, I didn't just study law. I paid for law school by fixing server vulnerabilities. Yes, I can hack the feed, but you're the one who has to do the talking." Sarah thought about the way Hughes had looked at her, like she was nothing, like she was mute. "I'll talk," she said, "and this time the whole world is going to hear me." The Chicago Convention Center was a fortress of glass and steel, buzzing with the energy of the Global Ethics Summit. It was the premier event of the year for corporate responsibility. Reporters from CNN, BBS, and Al Jazeera were setting up cameras. In the center of it all was Conrad Hughes. He stood backstage in the green room, having his makeup applied. He looked calm, regal. He had received a text from Thorne at 4 South a.m. "Targets lost, but folder secured soon. Do not worry." Hughes wasn't worried. He was untouchable. In 20 minutes, he would go on stage and announce a new Clean Oceans initiative, a sham charity designed to launder money and improve his image. "Mr. Hughes," his assistant chirped. "5 minutes to curtain. You're opening with the speech about transparency." "Excellent," Hughes said, checking his reflection. He practiced his benevolent smile. It was perfect. Meanwhile, 3 floors below in the server maintenance room, the air was stale and hot. David and Sarah were huddled in a cramped corner behind a rack of blinking servers. They had gotten in by wearing stolen janitor uniforms David had snagged from a laundry truck earlier that morning. It was a flimsy disguise, but people rarely looked at the help. It was the same invisibility Sarah had used as a waitress. "Okay," David whispered, his fingers flying across a laptop he had hardwired directly into the building's video patch panel. "I'm in the subsystem. I have control of the main projector and the audio feed." "How long do I have?" Sarah asked. She was no longer wearing her waitress uniform. She was wearing a blazer she had bought at a thrift store that morning. She needed to look like she belonged. "Once you start, I can lock them out for maybe 60 seconds before they cut the hard line," David said. 60 seconds, Sarah. That's it." Sarah took a deep breath. She adjusted the lapel microphone David had rigged up. "It's enough," she said. On the main stage, the lights dimmed. Dramatic music swelled. The giant screen behind the podium displayed the Oakhaven Global logo, a green leaf cradling the earth. A voice boomed over the speakers. "Please welcome the visionary of the year, Mr. Conrad Hughes." Thunderous applause filled the hall. Hughes walked out, waving to the crowd. He stepped up to the podium, gripping the sides with confidence. "Thank you," Hughes said, his voice smooth as silk. "Thank you. Today we talk about the future. We talk about a world where industry and nature coexist in harmony. We talk about integrity." In the server room, David hit enter. Click. The giant screen behind Hughes flickered. The Oakhaven logo vanished. Instead, a grainy, high-contrast image appeared. It was a scan of a document, a shipping manifest. The crowd murmured. Hughes didn't notice at first. He continued his speech. Integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching. Actually, Conrad, a female voice boomed through the auditorium speakers, overriding Hughes's microphone. Integrity is not poisoning villages when you think no one is watching. Hughes froze. He looked around, confused. What? Is there a technical issue? The image on the screen changed. It was now a live video feed. Sarah Bennett's face appeared on the 50-foot screen. She looked tired, her hair messy, but her eyes were piercing. She was looking directly into the camera. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah said, her voice echoing through the massive hall. "My name is Sarah Bennett. I am a waitress. And last night, Conrad Hughes told me something very interesting in German, because he thought I was too stupid to understand him." The crowd gasped. The murmurs turned into shouts. Hughes spun around and saw the screen. His face went white. He waved frantically at the sound booth. "Cut it! Cut the feed! It's a hack! Terrorists!" But the feed didn't cut. "He calls it Project Echo," Sarah continued, holding up the physical ledger to the camera. "These are his signatures. These are the bribes paid to Captain Robert Calzone of the Chicago PD. And these—" She held up a gruesome photo from the file. A river in Vietnam turned a sickly, neon orange, dead fish lining the banks. "This is what he calls medical supplies." Hughes was screaming now. "Security! Get that off the screen!" He tried to cover the projector lens with his body, looking ridiculous as he jumped in front of the light. Sarah switched to German. Her voice thundered over the speakers, crisp and authoritative. "Sie haben gesagt, ich bin ein Nichts, Conrad," she said. "You said I was a nothing, Conrad. Sie haben gesagt, Sie könnten mich feuern und mir beim Weinen zusehen. Nun, wer weint jetzt? You said you could fire me and watch me cry. Well, who is crying now?" In the server room, the door handle rattled violently. "They're coming!" David yelled. "I can't hold the lock much longer." "I'm uploading the full file dump to the press pool Wi-Fi," Sarah shouted. "Send it!" David hit the final key. A progress bar raced across his screen. "Sending to NYT, Washington Post, Interpol, 10%, 40%. The door to the server room burst open. Security guards rushed in, batons drawn. "Don't move!" Sarah ignored them. She looked into the camera one last time. "My name is Sarah Bennett," she said, "and I am not invisible anymore." 90%, 100%. Upload complete. The screen in the auditorium went black. The audio cut out. But it was too late. Every journalist in the room just heard their phones ping with a massive email attachment. On stage, Conrad Hughes stood alone. The applause was gone. The silence was absolute. Then, from the back of the room, a slow, solitary clap began. Then another. But it wasn't applause for him. People were standing up, holding their phones, looking at the documents. They were looking at him with disgust. Hughes loosened his tie. He couldn't breathe. He looked for Dietrich Vogel in the front row, but Dietrich's seat was empty. The old man had already vanished. Hughes looked at the side of the stage. Two men in suits were walking toward him. They weren't his security. They wore navy blue windbreakers with yellow letters on the back. FBI. The moments following the blackout in the auditorium were a blur of chaos and noise. In the server room, Sarah didn't resist when the security guards grabbed her. She didn't struggle. She simply let her hands be pulled behind her back, the zip ties biting into her wrists. Across the room, David was pinned against the server rack, his glasses askew, but he was grinning like a maniac. "We did it!" David wheezed, as a guard shoved him toward the door. "They can't unsee it." They were marched out of the convention center through the back corridors, away from the prying eyes of the press. But even in the bowels of the building, the panic was palpable. Sarah could hear the distant wail of sirens growing louder, not just one or two, but a symphony of them. They were thrown into a holding room, a windowless concrete box usually reserved for shoplifters during trade shows. The security chief, a man with a thick neck and a badge that said Oakhaven Contract Security, paced in front of them. "You two have just ruined your lives," he spat. "Industrial espionage, hacking, slander. Mr. Hughes is going to bury you so deep you'll need a mining permit to see the sun." Sarah sat on the metal folding chair, her heart rate slowly returning to normal. She looked the man in the eye. "Mr. Hughes isn't going to bury anyone," she said quietly. "Mr. Hughes is currently trying to figure out which non-extradition country will take him." The door banged open, but it wasn't the police coming to book them. Two men in suits walked in. They were the same men Sarah had seen on the monitors in the auditorium, the ones with the blue windbreakers. "FBI," the lead agent barked. He was an older man with tired eyes and a demeanor that brooked no nonsense. He looked at the private security chief. "Step aside. These two are in federal custody now." "They're criminals," the security chief protested. "They hacked the building." "They are material witnesses in a RICO investigation," the agent corrected, flashing his badge. "And unless you want to be charged with obstruction of justice, you will cut those zip ties immediately." The security chief paled. He pulled out a pair of cutters and snipped Sarah's bonds. She rubbed her wrists, feeling the blood flow back. The FBI agent knelt in front of her. "Ms. Bennett, I'm Agent Miller. We've been trying to build a case against Oakhaven for 2 years. We had the suspicions, but we never had the ledger. You just handed us the keys to the kingdom." "Did you get him?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. Agent Miller smiled, a rare, genuine expression. "Come with me. I think you deserve to see this." Agent Miller led them out of the holding room and toward the loading dock exit. He didn't take them to a squad car immediately. Instead, he stopped by the heavy metal doors that opened out onto the main street in front of the convention center. "Watch," Miller said. Through the gap in the doors, Sarah saw a scene of absolute pandemonium. Conrad Hughes was being led down the grand steps of the center, but he wasn't walking with his usual swagger. His jacket was pulled over his head to shield his face, but it was futile. Dozens of cameras were flashing, creating a strobe light effect. The crowd was jeering. Flanking him were 4 federal agents. His hands were cuffed behind his back. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, the wind caught his jacket, pulling it back for a split second. Sarah saw his face. It was a mask of pure terror. He looked old. He looked defeated. He looked small. He was shoved into the back of an unmarked SUV. The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in Sarah's soul. "What about the waste?" Sarah asked, turning to Miller. "The ships?" "The Coast Guard is intercepting the Oakhaven Titan as we speak," Miller said. "And the EPA is already on the ground in Vietnam. It's over, Sarah. The cleanup begins today." Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. It was David. "You know," David said softly, "I think that counts as a successful shift." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Sarah and David weren't charged with hacking. Instead, they were hailed as whistleblowers. The Bennett leak, as the press called it, became the biggest corporate scandal of the decade. Oakhaven Global's stock plummeted to 0 in 3 days. The board of directors was dissolved. Captain Robert Calzone turned state's witness to save his own skin, exposing a network of corruption that went all the way to the governor's office. But for Sarah, the real victory wasn't on the news. 3 months later, Sarah walked into the Sunnyvale Care Facility. She wasn't wearing her waitress uniform. She was wearing a soft blue dress and a coat she had bought new, not from a thrift store. She walked to the front desk. The receptionist, who used to give her pitying looks when her credit card was declined, now stood up straighter. "Good morning, Miss Bennett," the receptionist beamed. "Your grandmother is in the garden." Sarah walked out into the sunlight. Her grandmother was sitting in her wheelchair, a blanket over her knees, watching the birds. "Oma," Sarah said softly. The old woman turned. Her eyes, usually cloudy with confusion, seemed to spark with recognition. "Sarah, du siehst gut aus, mein Kind." "You look good, my child." "I have good news, Oma," Sarah said, kneeling beside her. "I paid the bill for the whole year, and I'm going back to school." The Dodd-Frank Act. It was a piece of legislation David had told her about. It entitled whistleblowers to a percentage of the fines collected by the SEC. Since Oakhaven was fined over $400 million, Sarah's share was substantial. She wasn't just safe. She was free. She held her grandmother's hand. "And I don't have to serve wine anymore, unless I want to drink it." Later that afternoon, Sarah met David at a coffee shop. Not a fancy one, but a good one. David was already there, typing away on a new laptop. He looked up and smiled. "So," David said, "the Invisible Woman is now on the cover of Time magazine. How does it feel?" Sarah picked up the magazine lying on the table. The headline read, "The Voice of Silence." "It feels loud," Sarah admitted, "but a good kind of loud." "Victor Thorne was picked up in Mexico yesterday," David added, sipping his latte. "He's trying to cut a deal, but I don't think they're buying." "Good," Sarah said. She looked out the window at the busy Chicago street. She saw waiters rushing to work, janitors cleaning windows, bus drivers navigating traffic. She saw the people the world usually ignored. "You know what Hughes's biggest mistake was?" Sarah asked, assuming he could get away with murder. "No," Sarah said. "His mistake was assuming that because I serve him dinner, I am below him. He forgot that the person who serves your food is the person closest to you. We hear everything. We see everything." She took a sip of her coffee. "He thought I was just a waitress," she whispered, a small smile playing on her lips. "He forgot that a waitress is the one person you should never, ever underestimate." David raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To the service industry," he said. Sarah clinked her cup against his. "To the service industry. And to learning German." And that, my friends, is the story of Sarah Bennett. It's a powerful reminder that dignity isn't defined by your job title, and intelligence isn't measured by your bank account. Conrad Hughes thought he was a god because he had money, but he was taken down by the very person he treated as invisible. It makes you think, doesn't it? How many times do we walk past people without really seeing them? How many secrets are floating in the air, just waiting for the right person to listen? If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, or if you just loved seeing a bully get exactly what he deserved, please do me a huge favor. Hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Share this video with a friend who loves a good justice story. And most importantly, subscribe and turn on notifications. I have an even crazier story coming up next week about a landlord who tried to evict a tenant, only to find out the tenant owned the building. You do not want to miss that one. Thank you for watching, stay safe, and remember, be kind to everyone. You never know who is listening.